Welcome to Thrive and Shine HR episode 46. This episode is all about mental health and an interview that I did yesterday, January 18th, 2025, with Christina King. Christina is a clinical psychologist and someone who works with individuals and organizations to help them around mental health. And she had started several years ago a nonprofit called Aspen Strong, where she works with organizations through the nonprofit to really help them build mental health programs within their organizations. So it was a very, very exciting interview, and I am super excited to share it with you. This is going to be how we're going to come live each second Sunday of each month based on the theme of each month. So this month, our theme is mental health and mental fitness. And so Christina is going to be the perfect person to talk to us about mental health and mental fitness. And our conversation weaves in and out with our own struggles personally, professionally, personally, and back and forth about how our own journey is really what helps us kind of serve others and just how it all can become so much more in our lives. So with that, I'm going to be sharing my screen and we are going to show you the interview. So let me share the screen here. And here we go. All right. Hi, everybody. This is our first interview on Thrive and Shine HR podcast. That's not Catherine and I, as we used to do every single week. We are switching things up in 2025. And with January being all about mental health and mental fitness, we wanted to bring on someone who is an expert who has not only been in the mental health field, but now has done so much around working with individuals and employers and organizations and really helping them in finding ways to really thrive when it comes to our mental health. So please help me in welcoming Christina King. Christina, welcome to Thrive and Shine HR.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jen. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, so great to have you.
Yeah. On this beautiful morning, we're time together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, well, I'd love to start a little bit about just kind of learning a little bit about you and your professional history and what really has driven you towards working in mental health.
Yeah, I would say that my journey started like quite in college. I left high school, got into college, and I'm not sure, as probably like half the teens out there didn't really know what my vision was for the future. And I really enjoyed two teachers in particular, one my writing teacher and one my psych teacher. And I probably enjoyed my writing teacher well more, and he was just really all about connecting us and building conversation and I think also fighting those like mindset pieces of like, do I belong? Like everybody belonged in that room and you knew it. Mm-hmm. That was a really powerful experience for me. And then my psych class, my teacher was great. And the content though is what really intrigues me. And studying the brain, understanding the different disorders and really seeing like where that could go. But again, that was undergrad, so it was very broad. Nevertheless, eventually I went out to get my undergrad or my graduate degree. But I had worked in the restaurant industry my whole life since I was 16 years old. And kind of like what better a way to kind of build the skills in therapy than to be in the service industry, right? So I have been doing that since 16, and when I left my undergrad, the money that I would make in the psychology field was well below what I was making in the restaurant. So I stay in the restaurant world, and then I also traveled around the world and the country. So I moved to Aspen, Colorado for a year from where I was, and went out and traveled to Australia and Europe, and kind of eventually got to a place where it's like, I need to feed someone. And then I went back to my graduate program. I was really intrigued by this clinical psych program. And that did it for me. Got into clinical psychology, then continued on the pathway of like postmasters, getting my license, working in community mental health. I worked in a step-down crisis center. So I dealt with a lot of serious mental illness. Really, I think my experience, how I would put it, is I really got to learn to make a difference in people's lives, even when they didn't see any hope. And so it was a really great experience. And at the same time, I had always wanted to be in my own private practice. So eventually, that is where I landed myself. Sorry.
I was writing down what you had said about being able to make a difference in people's lives, even if they didn't see any hope. And I was like jotting that down, and I apologize that I was looking down for a second. That what a beautiful like purpose right there. You know, just thinking of like kind of this bigger do. And I think when it comes to mental health, that's the spectrum, right? From people who truly are just kind of embracing life and everything that it gives it, to those who just have given up and are lost and hopeless. Wow, I mean that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So your private practice, so when you got into private practice, tell us a little bit about that and like how that's kind of transformed and evolved and where it brings you today.
Well, in my graduate program, there was a focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, and I had the opportunity to learn from Dr. Beck himself and really understand just a little bit more about that specific area of psychology. For me, it felt like a name to a system that already I was using, but just didn't know like that's what it was called. So it really resonated with me. And in private practice, I really created a staple of cognitive behavioral therapy, which in Philadelphia wasn't like when I started my practice there in Philadelphia. Beck Institute is in Philadelphia. So there was many cognitive behavioral therapists, but moving to a small town, not everybody was mainly focused on that. There was like a huge range. So I feel like that was what people looked for when they went to see me. And I love doing that work with my clients. At the same time, I was also building a nonprofit called Aspen Strong, now currently called Headquarters. And my reason for that was I felt our community, having lived here previously, having moved back and being a therapist, I found it difficult to understand where the resources were for my clients' family members or for colleagues, or just to make a referral or to understand what the continuum of care looked like in our valley. And I am also kind of like a connector. Like I really thrive off bringing people connected to what is helpful for them. And so I felt like there was this need to really create more connection within the mental health world and to create a safe place for people to connect to resources. If I take a few steps back, as I was in my graduate program, here I am getting my degree and working towards my license, and I had never formally been in therapy. And it was like this, wait, how did school let you do this? Like, shouldn't we all have been mandated to be in therapy?
But it's not, right? It's not a prerequisite.
Oh, right. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like I did counseling, like I met with my counseling person in high school and things like that. Yeah. And it certainly wasn't in my family growing up. It wasn't talked about or encouraged in any way. Like my parents, or that I know of, didn't go to therapy. And I think for many of us, like those things were very secret. I think less secret than my parents' era, and their parents' era, but like it still kind of was like secret, right? And I mean, I'm sure it still is in many communities and places. But nevertheless, I had never really had formal therapy. And at the same time, I was also really struggling. Like I had my professional, like that whole piece was fine. Professionally, I was thriving. Personally, I was literally having panic attacks. And it wasn't professionally connected, it was more personally connected. And so there was a good reason for me to go to therapy. I signed up. And I think this is important to know too, like when you work in the restaurant industry, they don't provide you with insurance. So I had, up until 27 years of age, I had never been employed by a company that issued me insurance. Like, I mean, I'm not saying like didn't pay for it, but like I had to go out and buy my own insurance, which I did, but there was no there was no therapy involved in that. You had to pay for it out of pocket. So one, the idea is not there. No, it's not inspired. It's not like part of my benefits package. There's just no talk about it. And there's certainly no talk about it in the restaurant world. Like in the restaurant world, you're your client's therapist.
Yeah.
And so I decided to get therapy because at the time was really great, fitting for me, and followed me out to Colorado, and I continued to work with him virtually for a little bit, trying to retrain my thought and figure out where I got back to. I got off track. I'm so sorry. Oh, and it's so awkward today. I'm just like, and I apologize for that. You're gonna have to edit this out.
Don't worry, you're doing great.
But yeah, anyway, so I go back and I get therapy for the first time. But that's where it was. It's like I didn't know how to look for a therapist. And I was like working for this community mental health center I was working for community mental health as I was getting my license. I did have insurance for the first time and I did have these benefits. So I went onto the insurance page and I spit out, what are all the options? It was like 20 pages. And I like, what do you, flipping through, like, what do you do with this? There is no face, to name, there's an address, and there's maybe like a little blurb, maybe, like insurance, like what your copay is, but there's like no real information. So I just started Googling people. Like, I don't know what normal people do, but I just started Googling people. Like I had a Googleable list and I had a non-Googleable list.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, and so then everybody who's on the list that you can Google, they're booked. They're booked. You can't.
Yeah.
So just when you finally feel like you connected with someone virtually, like through this web page, they're not available, right? So then I had to go to the non-Googleable site and start kind of looking like location, who seems like fitting, So I have to say it was a really scary process for me. And the first person I met with, I think she looked at me and was like, well, you're functional, so you're fine.
Yeah.
And I think normalizing things for people is really helpful. I'm a therapist now. I can see where that's beneficial. And yet to the point that she's not recognizing some serious issues that are underlying I could see like that was problematic for me. She also would like have her secretary would call her at the 40-minute marker. She'd pick up and she'd be like, okay, almost finished. And she'd be like, we only have 2 left. And I was like, it was just so, again, I had no experience. So, but I was a therapist technically. And I was like, this just doesn't feel right. But it took some time. And I get to, fast forward to being in Aspen, trying to figure out where I make referrals, and also realizing like we have a mental health crisis in our community and suicide rates are above normal. And so I'm thinking, well, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that 1, we have no idea where these providers are, and 2, we don't know who they are. So who's going to pick up the phone? I'm a therapist and it was really brave for me to do that. But I will say that if I wasn't a therapist, I think I would have called it quits. I think I would have gone back to I can figure this out on my own. And I'm not really sure where that would have landed me. It was in place to help people to connect to the resources and to build more of that like if crisis is over here, connection is over here, to really emphasize that connection piece. And not just emphasize it, but create it, allow it to happen, have the capacity for people to get connected. And so it's building my practice and working on Aspen Strong. And so that's where I became integrated in the workplaces. Because at the time for me, I thought, listen, if I can help businesses in my community to create, how did I put it? Like to really build up the structure of mental health within the organization, to see that many of our businesses here, they have an EAP, which is really great, but they're all giving out like a ski pass, you know what I mean? Or a bus pass, which is great. And that's really helpful. But I thought how can we incorporate their companies in having more awareness and more awareness around mental fitness and mental health? And that we could do that for all these companies then we can really make a difference in our community because it comes from the business. It gets to the employee brings it home, they bring it home to their partner, they bring it home to their family. And I thought there was a real way to make a connection there. So
what an amazing idea. Like what a phenomenal brainchild that was to come up with putting a nonprofit like that together. I just want to say that to you. I mean, that's just wild and yet, like so brilliant. So in terms of getting that help and support within the nonprofit, how have you found that that's really kind of inspired you in your continued journey, and how you've kind of grown from this experience of starting that?
I think that's a really good question. I think I've grown in many ways. One thing that comes to mind is in building this organization, which was no easy feat. I think I really learned a lot about building a company and building a business and what that looks like. I've worked for myself for a really long time, and when I worked in community mental health and which was in the government or even the restaurant industry, there's a chain of commands and there's a whole system, and I can't say that I really appreciated it. So for sure, I appreciate it so much more. And I think what that means to mental health, I think how we're really empowering our leaders to not just manage a company, but to really lead and to empower their team with the right resources to feel seen and safe and connected. I also know that when an employee feels seen and connected and heard, they thrive. They're able to be creative. They really grow. So I think that's like one piece of it. At the same time, I had brought in a symposium. I paired up with another therapist in this valley who has another nonprofit, and we focused on the developing brain, and we brought in a lot of professionals to talk about it. And that was a really great experience for me in a bit of a different way, but from a lens of cognitive behavioral therapy. And I was kind of, my practice was based in cognitive behavioral therapy. Now with these professionals, I got to learn different techniques, and just techniques of, I think I have really good, rapport building from being in the restaurant world all those years. I can go back to my supervisor when I was being supervised for my license, and my supervisor was like, Christina, what does empathy mean to you? And I was like, I am not going to coddle you, but I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader. And I look back and I'm like, oh God. and honestly, that's kind of how I was raised. Like there wasn't a lot of...
Yeah. That's a great definition for how I was raised too. Like when you said that, I'm like, when I was probably 21, 22, yes, absolutely. I would have had that definition.
Yeah. So, and I kind of was like, and so what I was feeling was like, I'm going to have pity for you and I'm not going to sympathize with you. Over the years, through the work of Brene Brown, through the work of these professionals who came to the symposium, like Tina Payne Bryson and Chris Willard, like those people, I learned that like sympathy and empathy are two different things. And I was adverse to sympathy, which makes sense, but I really didn't understand empathy and the power of empathy. So that experience and just, working hard and bringing things into my life and making things happen for our community also really affected me and the ways in which I started to show up, not just for my clients and for the people in my life, but for myself. And I do think it was a really big pivotal change because I grew up with, and I had a mentality of like, if you work hard, then you will be valued, which, okay, that makes sense. I mean, my dad had his own business, right? Like if he was a painter and he was a very good painter. And if he, in my eyes, it was like he painted the house and then he got paid, right? Like you do good work, you get paid. You do good work, you get paid, you get referred to, right? And my business was thriving. I had a lot of referrals. So it was really working. And yet it was also not working for me and I didn't realize it. And I had this work hard mentality, whether it was fitness or my actual work or working hard in a relationship. And I really didn't understand like just valuing myself and holding space for myself and really the power of compassion. And so that was one of the biggest lessons I've taken from my experience as a therapist and also putting a nonprofit together and putting to test the things that I would bring into my practice. Like, I'm never like just telling you like, oh, here's a theory. Like, I personally worked on it and it makes sense. And that's where this is coming from. And compassion was really that number one thing for me. Of like when I could really hold space for myself and have compassion and perspective taking and understanding, that's where I really started to thrive more. So that's probably the biggest like takeaway or take home from me from that experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's so powerful to see, that experience of starting that nonprofit and the lessons that you learned along the way has really helped transform you into the person that you are today. I think, in so many ways you've come so far and kind of seen what's possible. And then I think you finally realized, that for yourself. And then also recognizing that through self-compassion, then you could have also the ability to take the space and have that voice that you need that's truly your own. Kind of what I took from that. That was really great.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. And I don't know about you and how that fits into your life, but I also don't think like people really understand self-compassion. And I think that's like, that's where I'll talk to people about that in my practice or even if I'm doing a training. And the people often, I don't know what people often think of. And I'd be curious to know like what you think of, when you think of self-compassion. But what I see people doing is they do put on that cheerleader kind of voice and they get like they like try to pump themselves up. And I'm like, okay, that's potentially positive toxic positivity, right? But like, I like
warning.
Like I call it the cheerleader effect. And that's not compassion. Like compassion is not, being overly positive. It's putting things into perspective. And so anyway, that's been a big theme that comes through in my office a lot.
Wow. It's interesting that you mentioned that about self-compassion. I just recently finished the book Self-Compassion by Dr. Christina King, and I've read it twice now because it's so amazing. And it's really been so huge for me to understand the power of, the process of accepting oneself, the process of learning to really, love oneself, and that is really then the process of self-compassion, and so it's been, the last few years for me have just been wild. And so, Kathy and I on the podcast many times have kind of just talked about, as we've really learned some of these skills and put them to practice, right, like repeatedly, then it's just really shifted so much within ourselves, which then is almost like a light bulb getting turned on in terms of how that we show up with those that we help serve, and those that we love. It's we could go on, and I'm like, okay, what a great conversation this has been so far. Geez, a lot of quotable moments I think we're getting out of this. So I think let's kind of talk about some of the self-imposed mindset stuff that you've had to work through all of this that you've come so far over the past 10, 15 years. What do you feel are some of those self-imposed things that you really have to work on intentionally often in terms of your mindset?
Yeah, I think what I think rings true for all people, most people, is like my sense of belonging. And I think that the idea that the only one who gets to decide whether I belong is myself is a constant practice. And I definitely cannot believe, like I was more focused on fitting in than belonging throughout many parts of my life. And I certainly shifted that, although once again, yes, it's a constant reminder of like, okay, yeah, I get to decide. And if I decide whether I do belong, do I actually want to be here? And that's like the epiphany that came to be of like, well, yeah, I do belong here. And you know what? You guys aren't really nice, and I don't want to be here. You know what I mean? That's true. Why am I trying to fit into a group or people that like aren't it's not easy to feel included, right? So anyway, that's been powerful. I think the other one that I have that resonates from childhood, and I don't believe it's accurate, but it's a story I told myself, is that people don't understand me. That whatever comes out of my mouth isn't able to be understood or isn't clear. I don't articulate myself well. And yet there's a lot of evidence in my past, especially in my professional educational career, where I've had feedback of you're very articulate. Those are the words, that's the feedback. You're very articulate. And yet counterintuitive to this belief that people don't understand me, which I know exactly where it comes from. And yet that's still something I kind of have to check every once in a while, because what happens is when I don't believe I'm understood, then I go to this place of trying to prove myself or push.
Yeah.
And it's like so automatic, like I don't even know it's happening as an executive director or board member. Running an organization thinking like, well, they're not understanding what I'm saying, so I have to repeat it again, And I realized in hindsight that like, maybe they did understand me, but the overcompensating behavior didn't help, right? And so that's something for me to like continuously put in play. And I think it's way more grounded in that in my professional world now. And yet, our personal lives often will trigger us every once in a while, so it definitely comes up. But I think what's also powerful about recognizing these mindsets and where I struggle is like they're my greatest connections to my clients. And when I have a client who is similar in a way, and maybe they don't have to be similar, like I know exactly what it feels like to feel so ununderstood, like not understood, but also be fighting this place of like, but maybe you are. Maybe the only one who needs to understand you is you, and that's okay. So those are definitely some big ones, especially in the professional world.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, those are so huge. And I think, you can never really get to any of that without the courage, really, of like having that self-awareness of you doing the work that I know that you've had to do to really recognize that about yourself. Like the fact that you are saying, in those board relationships, you're like, maybe I was kind of overcompensating a little bit. Like, having that you can pull that back is, so huge. So what do you feel like are some of the tools that, what is in your back pocket, and how do you use that helps you to get to those places of awareness where you can do so without self-judgment and, without it kind of spinning out of control for you? So what's in your toolbox?
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that piece on like judgment, right? Because there's 100% a part of me and a journey of me, and quite potentially still exists some capacity, right? But in a larger capacity, years prior, where I definitely judged myself for that. I felt ashamed. I judged myself, and I certainly didn't talk about it, and I isolated a lot from that. But that doesn't really work for you, it doesn't really help you to expand and grow. Fortunately for me, like I have really kept up with therapy. I haven't always been consistent. I haven't always had the same therapist. But as I've grown, I've really reached out to people to, I think it's not even sometimes telling you like, hey, are you aware? Which I'm sure has happened, but it's also when you start talking about things and situations, it's like a sounding board. You're like, oh, did I just say that? That's where that awareness builds, right? And so I can say talking to somebody, even if it's not a therapist, right? That sounding board can be really powerful. Journaling, I think, for sure. And moments of self-reflection. I've really struggled over the years to be like a strong meditator, even though I highly believe in it. And at the same time, I've practiced more mindfulness, and the idea of like just going on a walk and not having like a podcast or anything, or even driving home, just taking moments of self-reflection to be like, what's coming up for me? What's in my body? Like what worked, what didn't work? And really trying to harness the tools of compassion to say, to recognize the part of me that's like crucifying myself for what I just did, whatever that is, and the other part of me that's like, okay, it's going to be okay. And also this other part of me, because if you really understand compassion, you realize, or at least in my perspective, that like compassion is here, shame is here. And like compassion is, this work, this is Christina's work, right? It's like compassion is mindfulness, common humanity. And that's the other piece. Like when you were talking, I was like, I don't know what it was that you said, but I was like, yeah, and they overcompensated too. Like those board members, like I wasn't completely fine, you know what I mean? Right. Yeah. Then, but I can certainly think that now and be like, okay, yeah, we all born our purpose selves, right? And so that's the humanity piece. And then that self-kindness, like being kind to yourself. And that the opposites of that, as you know, right, are like self-kindness, the opposite self-judgment, right? Common humanity, the opposite isolation, and mindfulness, the opposite of over-identifying, like I'm a bad person. I don't know how to lead. I'm not good at this. I'm not capable, like influencing the imposter syndrome more than I ever needed to, right? And just realizing, like, because I'm really good at all three of those things, and realizing, like, they literally hold hands with shame, and shame takes me nowhere. Yeah. And recognizing that even if I didn't believe that I shouldn't be persecuted for what I did, like, because it's easy to go down that road of like, well, I need to self-flagellate for a little bit, then I'll feel better, and then it doesn't work. Like it doesn't, because in my mind, I'm like, choosing that is going to take me away from resilience and being stronger and getting better. And I don't have time for that. I don't have time to waste. What time are we wasting on like doing that? Yeah. I want to hold passion, and that compassion, as I always say, is the key to resilience. And so it's like an active choice when I'm in that place of like, I understand I'm judging myself. And what I also know is like, this is not going to get me to where I want to get to, and I'm not going to be fruitful for anyone else. So I literally look at a watch and I'm like, okay, how much more do you want to do this? And I'm not saying that makes it go away like this. Like there's moments when things are a little bit more incriminating than others. And for me, I have certain practices of like, okay, you're going to hike up this mountain, and for the whole time you're going to hike up the mountain, you're allowed to judge the heck out of yourself. Go for it. Like I gave myself permission to just judge the heck out of it. But really, like, not judge me so much, but like judge the behavior. And like, I would say to some degree it's even different, because it's like the same and different at the same time, where it feels almost like I get the opportunity to kind of give myself critical feedback, right? And to really like analyze that heck out of it, and like put the magnifying glass and be like, what happened, and da 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 da, and like really jump in. And then on the whole hike down, I take the magnifying glass off, and I don't even put the broad lenses on. I put the kaleidoscope on, and I'm just like, okay, refocus your attention. And anytime it comes out where I'm like, oh my God, and I can't believe I did that, I'm like, no, wait, we just took an hour to do that. We're done. And just this process of kind of having this is like Abraham Hicks' work, where she's like, you're done. Mm-hmm. You're done. Yeah. You're done. She says like 1,000 times. Done. And like, it's just like, okay, you're done. And then you just give yourself permission to like forgive yourself and move on. Yeah. It's not a perfect process, but it is, it has worked for me. But yeah, so that's that's my tool. That's definitely. That's so good, though. I mean, I've heard that over and over again, and I work with a therapist as well who talks a lot about that. It's like, yes, let yourself like go there, right? That honesty with ourselves. You talked about it a little bit earlier, just about like self-awareness. We have to be honest. It's almost like this brutal honesty, but it's, it can be without the weight of judgment. It can be without like going down the shame spiral, but it takes time and practice, and like, that climb up the mountain and then the climb down, that takes that self-discipline. So these are like the tools that I think, what I'm hearing you say is like the work over time is like really like, working on those tools. And it's not going to be perfect all the time. Some of the times you are going to come halfway down the mountain. You're like, oh my gosh, I just spent the last 30 minutes stuck in a loop and I just caught it. So like the reality of it is we're still human, but to know that, it's kind of this work in progress, and that it does take intention to be able to get
that progress that looks like that you know, continue to work on. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more and more, like I love that practice and it all the time. And yet I'm also trying to build like journaling into that. Like I've always been a good journaler in certain ways of my life, never like consistent. And the idea of just kind of writing out like what Brene Brown says is like your shitty first draft, like just writing. Writing, and allowing it to be just, and finding some peace and solitude in that. And then I'll go back and I'll read it and I'll be like, wow, like, and what, like, how can we shift that story? And I just kind of, sometimes I circle things or highlight, and then I just write after that of like, that was a really interesting story. I wonder where that came from. Like, does that serve me anymore? And what story do I want to tell with this experience? And, when it comes to maybe like the overcompensating for not feeling understood, it's like, yeah, I wanted to be understood because I didn't feel I was understood. And everybody in that room had the opportunity to hold space for me too and be like, Christina, we see you're being a little off and dysregulated. Like, let's just take a second. Like, why don't we slow this down and let's see if we understand you? And it's something I've also learned too of like putting people in my life who are going to hold that space for me. And if I'm going to keep my circles or the people that I work with or my community in some capacity, I'm always going to surround myself with the people who are shunning me because my overcompensating beliefs come out, and no one's going to check in and be like, hey, are you okay? Like, and that doesn't work either. So I've also learned to really kind of see what are the environments and the people who are going to hold that space for me even when I am in my worst place. And I'm not saying they can't get triggered, right? But they're going to understand me no matter what. Or they're going to make an attempt to understand, like, I'm just doing the best that I can. And they're going to hold that space for me. And they're going to confront me when necessary and also just be there. And I think that's also been really powerful. I think people in our lives are like the strongest anchors to our own success. And I don't mean like, I don't know what success I'm talking about, but I think I mean like resilient success, right? Like for our own, like just being resilient and having strong mental health and being kind to ourselves is also a reflection of the people who are in our lives. So for sure, I see that. Because I will say, and don't really know your experience too much, but I definitely have worked for organizations where I know I'm a hard worker. I know I'm a badass. Like I am creative. I get stuff done. I have a lot of integrity. And I've also learned, like, if you're going to be on the other side in my work atmosphere and you're not going to help me to grow and you're going to judge me, I don't have any time for that anymore. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
Like I've had those experiences and I look back and I just try to tell that part of me, like, they were doing the best that they can and they didn't know. And that's all good and dandy. But I get to choose now to work with people who can empower me, who have the tools. And I also get to teach them if they, I don't think it's like, I don't want to like teach them like as if I'm like this savior, right? But I also get to empower them too and give them the benefit of the doubt. But listen, if the benefit of the doubt isn't working, you're done. Like it's not the right fit for me,
Oh my gosh. It takes so much courage and badassery to get to that place that you can just really ground in yourself and be like, you know what, bye. It's not personal. This is just energetically not worth my time. And I can relate to that so strongly. I mean, it just has taken such a road of knowing thyself, right? Like getting to know ourselves so deeply and so truly, and then being able to, from that place, be able to communicate that, articulate it, as you said earlier, in such a way where it's like, this is just not for me. So, wow, I think that's beautiful. And that's like one of the strongest messages that Catherine and I really preach on this podcast is really trying to help anybody, but particularly women in the HR field, try to find their voice, try to really be able to recognize that
truth within themselves and then find their way to be able to speak it and move on if they need to move on, but just really being true to themselves in that way.
Yeah,
fabulous.
I love that, and I think we need more people doing that, because I sit here and I recognize I am privileged. I'm a privileged woman who has their own business. I mean, yeah, I can argue that too, because I worked my butt off to get here. You know what I mean? And it's not easy to run your own business. But I am also privileged to be able to choose, pick and choose. Whereas I am aware that it's not that easy for everyone, because they work in an industry or they have a certain trade or what they do, or what they bring to a company. They've always worked in a company. Their work is tied to their salary. Their salary is tied to how they make a living and how they raise their kids and all those things. And there's decision making. And just because your employer or your coworker isn't able to hold space for you or judges you or just isn't really able to be in that space where you're thriving and working together, I know that people can't just quit and leave. I know that that's not like that easy. And right. But I do think you're on the right track, and that's like the work that I do is definitely helping, and I love helping women to just feel secure in themselves. And if they're gonna make the decision, leave, great. I empower them, I support them, we talk through it. And if they're not, I help them. I'm there holding that space for them to figure out how they can continually show up with integrity and assume the most generous interpretations with whatever boundaries they need to put in place,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful though. I mean, because that truly is the reality for so many. And so being able to then help to work with that level of resistance, which is, what so many of us who are kind of stuck in these spots or feel stuck in these spots. And so then it just builds, right? This building of resistance and that how that then manifests itself in the relationships, but then also in how we are to ourselves, right? I know in certain situations where I was in jobs where I felt stuck. We moved to a small rural area in Southern Oregon in 2012. And at the time, the job market was horrible. I got into an HR role when we moved up here. And it was just such a wrong fit, right? It was completely the wrong fit for me in so many ways. And that resistance within myself, I didn't have the tools, right? I didn't have anything to be able to know what the hell to do with it. So instead I drank and I did all these other things at the time to just try to, buffer it away and numb it away. And looking back, I can really how much at that time there was this cry for help, right? In all these ways, because of just not really realizing that it was just that resistance of not being somewhere that I was happy with, and not really knowing how to have the boundaries, having no clue of what that really was, even, or of a complete misconception, at that time. So I'd love to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of what you do now and how you help support organizations or how you help support individuals. Where does your passions lie in helping to support others? I know that I saw on your website, it talks about secure leadership. I want to hear all about it. I know we don't have too much time left, but I want to hear about that. And just really, what are you putting out there that our listeners and viewers, I think, really would love to know about?
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. And I kind of go back to what we were talking about, is that work right there to me is the biggest piece of secure leadership. Secure leadership for me evolved from this, from the work of Tina Payne Bryson and Dan Siegel, where when a child feels safe, seen, soothed, and secure, that's where they thrive. That's where they regulate, they build those secure attachments with their caregivers, and that evolves into their adulthood. And I won't go down that road too much, but I'm kind of taking that same philosophy of I'm no longer a child looking to my parents to feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. I have the ownership and the ability, right, to do that myself. And so secure leadership is first taking ownership over your life and being responsible for what's working and what's not working. And I think it's so easy to get into the blame and shame game, even if you're self-blaming, right? I believe there's ownership and there's blame, and they're two different things. To like take ownership over something versus to self-blame. Self-blame is cheap. Ownership is like, oh, is that compassionate voice of like, I did that and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Really taking ownership over our lives, our actions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and how they contribute to the outcomes of our life, and really living into our bodies and finding a sense of belonging here first, and realizing like that's where it starts. And if it's not here, then it's never going to be out here. It's like Maya Angelou's quote that's on my wall, like, you belong nowhere, you belong everywhere. No place at all, the reward is high, the price is high, the reward is great. And so right there, right, really having like living into like what boundaries need to exist for you to believe the best of yourself and others, and where's your integrity and your values. So I help people to really live into their own bodies and find a sense of security, and also recognize like what are the things that help them to thrive, like that soothe part. And also what are the things that help them to soothe when they're in negative mindsets or spiral loops, or just poor cycle of behavior that just doesn't work for them, whatever that may be. Recognizing all those pieces and also creating a vision, a pathway for them, pulling in the empowerment dynamic. And I'm not quite sure if you're aware of that, but it's the difference between being problem focused and outcome focused. And when we're problem focused, we look at the problem, it leads to a feeling of anxiety. And then when we feel anxious or fear, right, it drives fight, flight, or freeze. And those behaviors are not necessarily, they might be real to us, but they're not helping us, right? Like the difference, like, does it make sense that you're doing that? Sure. It makes sense that you think that way, feel that way, act that way, especially when you're looking at a problem. What doesn't work for you, right? And no, okay, great. Really helping people to shift into this outcome. What's the outcome that they would like to achieve? Whether that's with themselves or relationships or workplaces, like what's the outcome within your workplace or the relationships within your work? Or when I'm working with families or couples, like what's the vision you have for your marriage? What's the vision you have for your relationship with someone else? And, some people will be like, well, I want them to be able to listen to me more. And I was like, no, that's not a vision. First of all, you're identifying a problem. And if you're identifying a problem, then you're getting anxious again, then you're getting controlling. So see that loop. So I'm really helping people to create a vision, which is really hard. It's like, oh, what are your goals? Like some people really don't know how to create a goal. A lot of us know what we don't want. We don't know what we do want. So really helping people to the visions of what they would like for themselves, which creates passion-based emotions, and those passions lead us to be more authentic and make small steps to get to where we want to get to. So that's the work of secure leadership, and it's not just leadership within a workplace, but it's how you lead your life. So showing up professionally in a way that is grounded, you take ownership, and your most secure self shows up. Because when you are in your most secure body, then your most authentic behaviors come to fruition. That wrapped up in a nutshell, but made it up in a nutshell.
Well, I feel like that's almost like a mic drop moment. It's like, yeah, you want to be your most secure, authentic self? Boom. No, I love that so much, and it really resonates so strongly with me with something that we're working on in my company right now. So it's like, as you're talking, I'm like, really thinking about it for my own situation, because we have a lot of very, very long-term leaders of the organization, and having something like this that really helps with mindfulness and just really helping them kind of feel more secure and grounded within their own selves, I think would just be transformative. All right. Well, I appreciate that so much. And I wonder, do you do any work, do you have any programs that you do or anything with like larger organizations where you come in and do, certain types of seminars or anything like that you've done?
Yeah, I over the years have definitely worked with businesses in many capacities. I have a professional or a personal development program that a couple of my workplaces use. So it's a little bit more focused on really helping their employees to work on their personal selves, which is so funny because every time when I do that, they really always look back into the professional world. But it's hard to get kind of separate personal and professional sometimes. But that's the whole point too, is like if we can really help you know, nurture the personal lives of the employees in their company, then they show up to be their best selves. And, we know where that goes. They place, right? And then I have a professional development program as well. In the interim, in the workings, I am working on a secure leadership program academy. It's still kind of being worked on at the moment, but I've been testing it out over the years and have multiple workplaces where I've worked on attunement, learning how to be attuned with your staff members as supervisors. I work with a lot of supervisory programs, have conflict, feedback, I loved a feedback workshop that I did where we have a lot of practice sessions and I had the supervisors practice asking for feedback, which is like a skill I don't think many people are good at. And it was a very vulnerable, some people really took it to heart and it was really, really powerful. So yeah, I am I like to get in there and really do some cool work, but I also at the moment create kind of specialized programs. I have some themes like that I just shared, but I really try to attune to whoever I'm working with, it's HR, leadership, staff, to figure out okay, what's coming up in the company and here are the things that I can provide you. Or here's just my ideas of what could work. So that's where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I like everything you're saying. I'm like, yes, like a checklist. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And given your experience in clinical psychology and neuroscience, I can only imagine the impact that you have both at the personal level, but even also at the collective organizational level. I think it's amazing what you do. So I'm so grateful and thankful that you came on as our first guest here for episode 46. Thank you so much, Christina. So quickly, is there any quick way where people can reach you? We're going to put your website and all of that in the show notes, but anything quickly where people can reach you?
Yeah, just ChristinaMKing.com. That's my website and all the links to social. And I'm not a big social person. I don't have time. I love curating a place where my clients that I already have can see. I like just sharing Adam Grant and cool things. I don't have time for any of that. Sharing cool, knowledgeable, funny kind of things. And it's great because my client base always feeds off of that. But I'm definitely not a promoter by any means. So you're not going to find that stuff on there too much. But, and you can always reach out. And I love getting people's emails and setting up calls to connect with people. And I'm always open to that. So thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure. And it was really as well. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. I mean, this conversation, I feel like I have learned so much, and that's really the goal of these episodes, is to really help, everyone out there be able to maybe expand ourselves just a little bit more, especially when it comes to the mental health of the people that we work with and also in ourselves. So thank you so much, Christina. And with that, we will sign off. Bye, everybody.
All right. Wow. Oh my gosh. There were some huge takeaways that I have some notes. Oops. Okay. That's gone, right? It's gone now. Some huge takeaways that I got from the conversation with Christina. You could tell I was fangirling her because it was just wild. I've always, all my life, I've had something really intrigue me about psychology and people's brains and how we think and all of that. So anytime I get to talk to somebody who is a nerd in that way, as I know that I am, I will just so that was such a good conversation. So I think, one of the things was, her desire as she started to really think about how to give back was, how can you help others? How can I make a difference in people's lives when maybe they've lost hope? And when it comes to mental health, and when you look at, state services, federal services, whatever it is, the lack of hope, I think, is one of the first things to go because there's just not the services out there. And so, doing what she did and creating what she did, you can see how it really made a difference for her to build something that really connected with helping to give people hope. And I think myself and anyone else in the field of HR can really relate to that. It's one of the things that I think most people I've ever talked to who are in HR would say about that they love the most about it, that there's a hope that we can give to people, whether they're coming in for their first job, whether it's benefits and they don't understand, whether it's retirement and they don't understand, whether it's like growing in their career, whether it's a performance review where really constructive but needed feedback is being given. Whatever it is, it's about hope. It's about finding hope. And so resonated with me because what she talked about is every single person alive. What we all want, what we all need at the core of everybody is to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel soothed, and to feel secure. We all have it within us. We want to feel seen. We want to feel safe. We want to feel soothed. We don't want to feel in threat, the fight, flight, or freeze. And we want to feel secure. We want to feel grounded and okay with ourselves and everything around us without feeling as though it's a threat or without feeling as though we're being judged or that we have to be something that maybe we're not comfortable being. I think knowing that and the program that she's put together around secure leadership was just such a beautiful, like, aha around, wow, you've created something that really helps individuals, right? So what she talked about is every individual taking their own personal ownership around our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, our behaviors, everything that combined together makes us exactly who we are is it what we need to make sure that we're taking full and complete ownership when it comes to our lives and our reality in our lives. And so being a leader of myself, being a secure leader of myself means I take full ownership of right here, right now. I take full ownership of every moment I possibly can and be as very present to make sure I'm accountable anytime I'm not meeting expectations or anytime that I know that I might be getting in my own way, right? With my doubts and my worries and my anxieties and whatever else that kind of keeps me from being able to continue to move forward. So, wow, 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 wow. What an amazing conversation. So I thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, episode 46 of Thrive and Shine HR is signing off. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.